Hello and welcome to TidyX episode 25. All right, TidyX is a screencast where we go through and try to explain how our code works. My name is Ellis Hughes. I'm a statistical programmer. You can find me on Twitter at Ellis_Hughes.
And I'm Patrick Ward, and I do data analysis in sport. You can find me on Twitter at OSPPatrick. You can find both of us on Twitter at Tidy_explained. And you can get in contact with us, if not on Twitter, via email at tidy.explained@gmail.com.
All right. So yeah, definitely reach out to us. We love to hear from our fans. We see the comments below. We try to comment on those. We've gotten a few emails that we've tried to respond to. So always love hearing from you guys. All right. So TidyX 25. Can you believe we're already on 25? We've been doing this for a few months now. We're really excited. We've covered some great TidyTuesdays and submissions and whatnot. In this episode, we're actually going to be starting a new series, a new concept that we're excited to debut, where we're going to be using things that we learned from TidyTuesdays to create a Shiny app, right?
Yeah, so we basically we want to, if you can think about it, that we're going to like build from scratch and give you, the people, a sort of learn by doing seminar on building Shiny apps. Shiny apps is something I literally build, seems like daily right now. But they're super flexible and easy ways that you can take your data and your analysis and put it into an interactive format for people within your organization to work with and play with and look at. Super easy to visualize and create. So we thought it'd be cool to take some of the concepts. I think we've done Shiny apps in like 3 or 4 maybe of these.
Something along those lines. We've kind of done them here and there. We've kind of like, oh, and here's a Shiny app.
Yeah. Exactly, and we always have we never have enough time, it seems like, and we go 2 inches deep, and we always kind of rush through it and say like, oh, there's the syntax is always weird, but just keep working on it, and here's the user interface, and here's the server, and there's your Shiny app, and have a nice day. So we thought instead we'd take a little bit of time to kind of work through this and show you where to start. So literally today, we've got some fake data. We'll go through that, and then we're going to find like a much cooler data set and build some of the TidyTuesday concepts in as we go. But this is literally like my template, like my starting template. When I sit down to start a Shiny app, before I start customizing anything, this is where I just work on like, can I get some data in there and produce an output, and then I'll start making it look pretty.
Yeah,
and do other.
exactly. I mean, that's the most important part. You can spend ages making a Shiny app look pretty. You become a UI expert at that point, where it's no longer really about the data. It's about how can I make it look really nice. But what we're going to focus on today is how to, like Patrick said, how to get this thing going, how to get your first Shiny app together, and kind of explain the concepts that I know really tripped me up when I first started using Shiny, and I know trip a lot of people up as well. So I will share my screen, and we can get this thing going. All right, let me open up my RStudio, and here we go. So this is just an R script. You'll find that when you're creating Shiny apps, you'll be using R scripts. You won't be using R Markdown like we typically have discussed. That's for a later topic. I know you can do some stuff with Shiny and R Markdown, but we're not touching that right now. And so the packages that you need to be using for creating a Shiny app, surprise, surprise, is Shiny. It's kind of expected, but also we load Tidyverse because it's got all that data manipulation tools that you'll probably be using in your Shiny app, because more than likely your data won't be perfectly clean going into it, or you need to do some manipulations within your app. So let's load Shiny and Tidyverse, and then we'll get into the creation of our fake data set. Do you, Patrick, want to take us through that?
I literally just simulated some totally fake, we'll call it game running data. I was looking at like soccer data. The simulation here has like no data generating process in mind. It's not like I thought, oh, there'd be a trend in the first 30 games and their first 10 games, and then it changes or something like that. I literally just pulled out 30 or 20 athletes, had them each play 30 games. I gave them a bunch of fake positions, and then I simulated some sprint distance and total distance. And literally, like I said, nothing specific. I literally built this with the rnorm function, which is going to give us data that is simulated from a normal distribution with here for sprint distance, a mean of 150 meters and a standard deviation of 40 meters. And maybe if these series go well, as we do a few of these, we can do another series on simulation, because that's another big kind of cool topic that you can really get in the weeds on, and it's something that I use a lot. But this is just a simple simulation. We put it in a data frame. We also set the seed so that it's replicable for you. You can get the same result that we get, reproducible.
Exactly. So now we end up with this data frame here that's got athlete. So athlete, I mean, their names are just A through 20 letters in. And then a random game. What?
Yeah, I don't know how many. I don't know what letter 20 is.
There's some of them here. To answer that, letters 20. T. A through T. There we go. Should have looked that up beforehand. And then random positions, how far they ran in that game, and total distance they ran in that game. Totally random. No real, as he said, no real values here. But now we're going to hop into the UI, which is the user interface of the Shiny app. This is where you can get really crazy. Well, I guess there's a lot of different places you can get really crazy in Shiny, but here can get really complicated because you're essentially designing the website's look and feel here. Thankfully, they come with really great defaults that you start immediately recognizing it everywhere. If you're working with Shiny a fair amount and then you see another UI, you're like, they use Shiny. I can tell because of this here and this here. But it's because the defaults are great. So first you use this function fluid page, which is defining the page, so the HTML, like the big structure HTML of your web page for you. This means that things can kind of shift around a little bit when you're working in different screen sizes. So you'll be able to see this when we start up the Shiny app. When it's thinner, it behaves in a certain way versus when it's wider. So you can have like a widescreen display versus, looking on the mobile app. And so it handles all that for you, which is really nice. Next, a thing that I know a lot, basically every other Shiny developer ever likes to do, is have all your controls on the left-hand side. I think that's just a common UI practice, is to have anything that'll be manipulating what you're going to be seeing in your view in a side panel. So they come with a really nice function that'll create that piece for you called Sidebar Panel. And in that, you can start putting your interactive pieces for your users. Patrick, do you want to take us through this one?
Yeah, so the Sidebar Panel is where you're going to give the user the control of the app and allow them to select the bits of information that they want to select, that you're going to allow them to select. So here, we basically have a simple sidebar panel with two selection inputs. And maybe as we extend this, we'll put in like a third one that's like a slider for the number of games so you can zoom in. But for right now, we're going to keep it really simple. So select eyes input or select input, either one of those two, are the ones that you would use if you were trying to make a selection on like a name or a position group, something like that. So here we have select eyes input. The input ID is the ID from the data frame that you're pulling the data from that you will want to select from. So in our case, in our data frame, I called it position. So the input ID is going to come from position, and label is what I want the user to see. So instead of having the big full position written out, I just abbreviate it to POS. So that's what they'll see. The choices that I'm going to give them are the choices of position group within our original data frame. So I just say unique df $position says only return the unique position values. And those are the choices that the person is going to have. And selected is basically when the web page opens, that's going to tell the server which value of position I want already selected. In this case, for no reason, I just selected center back. Maybe if I was working for, the Lakers, I would want to say forward, and I would want to have the athlete selected as LeBron. So every time the coaches or decision makers open it, it's the best player on the team, right? In this case, I just randomly selected center back, and then multiple. I don't want to allow the user to select more than one position at a time. So this is essentially like if you've ever worked in maybe in Excel, when you use like Power Pivot or Power BI or Tableau. This is like a drill down, right? So the multiple is saying, I don't want them to select multiple. I want them to get center back, and then I want to see the center backs below that and select from there. And so my next select as input is for the athlete at the athlete level. So now I'm saying input ID, again, athlete is what I called it in the database. I label it the same. Unique names of the athletes is going to be the choices. This time I leave selected as blank because I don't want any particular athlete to come up, but I'm going to allow the user to select multiple athletes within that position group. And so what that'll do, you'll see, is that'll produce a line for each athlete across every game. Maybe in a future iteration of this, we can have multiple, like a picker, essentially like a picker selection, where if you select all, it compresses them all and gives you the average for the group, let's say, of a game or something like that. But for right now, we'll keep it simple. We're going to let the person select the position and then the athlete or athletes within that position. And once we've got our controls set, we go to the main panel. And so the main panel is basically going to be what we see. So this is going to be the piece that interacts to whatever the user puts in, the user specifies. And so in this case, we've got two plot outputs, nothing crazy, no tables, nothing like that yet. Two plot outputs. Output one is going to be the output ID that we call dist. And so you'll see why this is important in the server. And then we're going to have a plot output called sprint dist. So basically, we want a plot of their distance, and we want a plot of their sprint distance. And that's pretty much it. This is a really basic, like I said, this is literally the starting UI template that I always write for myself. And whatever my data set is, I just go in and I basically fill in the input IDs based on that data set and the names of that data set, the column names of that data set. And this is how I just get started before I get into something more elaborate.
Yeah, exactly. So these input IDs here and these output IDs here are really important, and they need to be unique for each element or each piece of the Shiny app that you're going to be inputting data from or outputting data from, because this is what you use in your server. So this is the UI, right, that we've just described. This is like the front end, what everyone sees. Now we're going to have to go back to the server, where we're going to have to be able to communicate between the two. And this is where these IDs matter and why they need to be unique and distinct between each one. So now we're going to jump into the server, and the server is a function, right? So it's going to be when the Shiny spins up, it spins up the HTML, but it also has an R session running in the background that'll be running this and deciding how to behave based on the inputs. And so that's why it's a function. So the function has three, and this you don't get to decide. This doesn't change between all the different Shiny apps. There's three different inputs or arguments that it has. This is the inputs, the outputs, and the session.
Actually, session one, you don't always need.
Yes, you don't always need.
Here, yeah, we only use it here, and we'll tell you why here in a second. But usually, you only need function input and output.
Yes, exactly. If you're doing like even simpler, you don't need this, but we have a little bit of kind of funky stuff that we wanted to get into, so you have to have the session there. This is just the format. Don't change it. This is what it is. All right, so then the first piece that we're going to get into inside of our server is this reactive element assigning to dat. And reactive programming is incredibly weird for most R programmers, I find, because it is a way you have to think about behavior that isn't the linear way that most programmers, especially R programmers, think about, where what you're saying is inside of this reactive, if there's a piece that updates that the user can input to it, or some other reactive element, if that updates, rerun this code. And it's super weird to think about because you're like, what? I wrote it linearly. Why is it rerunning at a different time? Just think of it. Think of this as it is looking at all the different pieces that could be changing, and if it sees something that changes that exists inside of this reactive, it'll just rerun that chunk of code and reassign to dat. So now that we've kind of covered a little bit of reactive programming, what's going on here is df, which is that data set that we generated earlier. We're going to filter it to keep only the positions or the position that we identified, so there's only one position that can be selected at a time. By default, I think it said it's center back. Yeah, so it'll start up filtering to only keep center back. And assign this to D, but this is only inside the reactive, so it doesn't exist outside of the reactive. And then we've got this kind of funky update selective or selectize input. Patrick, do you want to maybe explain what this piece does?
Yeah. So we selected only position from the DF from our original data frame, and that's also, it's important there where it says filter position equals input, because that's the input that it's reading from what we wrote in the function there. So like I said, I want to be able to select only one position group, and then I want to give the user the ability to select multiple athletes only within that position group. So in order to do this, that's where the session piece comes into our function there. So you see we have an input, that's our inputs. We have an output, which will be our plots, and the session is the piece that's going to allow us to make the update of the player names specific to the position group that we're drilling into. So we use this update selectize input function, and it's going to do exactly what it says. It updates the selectize input that's in our user interface. We call session to start, so that's telling the function what we're working with. And the column that we're interested in updating is the athlete column. And now we've changed the choices. So if you remember in the UI, we had the choices as unique DF athlete. We're now saying once you've decided which position has been inputted from the user, we're only going to allow them the unique D, which is what we called our data frame right there. We're only going to allow them the athletes within that filtered position group. So we're updating our selectize input in the user interface. So basically, the function of this server is talking back and forth with the user interface. So it's saying, oh, person selected center back is only players A, B, and C. So those should only be the selections that I'm going to get, or what I'm going to offer the user to be able to select from.
Exactly. So now that it's updated the selectize input here with these new choices here, then what it's going to do is going to return D to dat. And so once again, a very strange concept. More or less think of dat as a function that's going to return the value D for us. That's kind of how you use it going forward now, is when you run. So let's just go on to the next piece here, because it'll be a little bit clearer in practice rather than trying to explain it in theory. So next we're going to go on to our first output from the Shiny app, which is the sprint distance plot. Okay, so what we're going to do is first we generate the render plot function here, which is what tells Shiny, hey, I'm going to create a plot within this expression here. We're going to return this and going to be outputting this. So, okay, so know that. We're going to assign the output to output $sprint dist. And so what this is saying is whatever plot I generate in here, send it to the output where the ID is sprint dist, which is our second plot here. So plot output saying, okay, I'm going to accept a rendered plot, but the ID that I have is sprint dist. And so this is why it's important to have that one-to-one. You can only have one ID per output or input option.
Which is massively important if you're doing like tab sets in Shiny, where you have like maybe a tab by position group. That totally, absolutely destroyed me when I first created a. Yeah,
so it can get very complicated.
Man.
And very confusing, but we're not doing that yet. This is just concepts at this point. We'll cover that in a future episode here. So dat parentheses. So the parentheses is really important because it's a reactive element, and we want to get the value out of that reactive element. And so that dat parentheses is like, give me the value you have at the end of this, which is D in this case here. Now pipe that into, so now we're getting into our normal tidyverse. Basically everything inside of a render or reactive, more or less, can be treated like basic R code. So inside of that reactive, inside of that render, it's going to run exactly like normal R code would run, the way you'd expect it to. And so filter on athlete, so the filter on the column athlete, but only keep the input athlete name. So input $athlete. So this is from the selectize input that we have here, which we just updated to make sure we couldn't select an athlete that was outside of our position group. So we know that always will have a value, or well, it won't be able to select an athlete that doesn't exist inside of it.
Right. And also keep in mind, we did use the in operator there.
Yes.
Because we're allowing for multiple athletes. If we were to do the standard equals, our Shiny app will break when we try and print it. It's not going to know what to do because I specified in the user interface multiple equals true. So we have to tell R that it has the option of selecting multiple people.
Exactly. And then we just throw it into a ggplot too. And this is just a really basic ggplot where we pipe the data into ggplot. The x-axis is game, the y-axis is how far they ran, or how far they sprinted, excuse me. We're going to set the color. So we're defining some aesthetics a little bit early here, but we're defining the color and grouping of these by athlete, so that it only does it, it'll color, since we can select multiple athletes, it'll separate all the pieces out by their own athlete. And geom lines, so add lines based on this data set, so connect all the lines.
Yeah, and there's literally nothing scary there. This is, once you're inside of render plot, like you can go back through the 24 previous TidyX videos and literally do whatever you would normally do in ggplot, and it's going to get kicked out inside of that render plot as an output. So
exactly,
nothing there is scary. Like whatever aesthetics and themes you want, and you could do it. It's totally free game.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's really nice. And we use the exact same code, more or less, to output the distance plot as well, but now we're going to output to $dist. So this will then be sending it to this upper plot here, the plot output ID dist. But this time we're going to use total dist for y as opposed to sprint distance. And there we have it. We have a UI that allows the user to input the position and what athletes. The only athletes they can select are athletes that exist inside of the that position. Then it'll have two plots in a main panel on the right side that'll have distance and sprint distance. And we've got the behaviors defined in the server. And
let's look at it.
And so now we run the function Shiny app, which has a bunch of back-end stuff for us that we don't have to deal with because the folks over at RStudio that created this, namely Joe Cheng and now Winston Chang are the maintainers, do a bunch of really cool stuff in the back end that handle this for us. So we'll make that larger. So as you can see, this is blank, but that's because when you create a ggplot and you don't have data going into it, it's going to be a blank plot. That's why it's like this. But say we want to, all right, athletes, so let's click A, B, C, D.
There you go.
Shiny just populated because now it was able to, there we go. So, okay, now I went over to here. So now it was able to go and filter it, and input athlete now had athletes A, B, C selected. So now it had actual data going into our ggplot. It was coloring by athlete.
And you could, and the nice part about that select eyes input is, like, we can delete athlete B by himself, and we can enter in athlete D instead. And it's drop down, but it's also like if we had full names here, you could start to type a name and it'll autofill.
This case we don't have
no one named Hello World. That'd been great. What was who was it? Ron Artest? Didn't he used to have Meta World Peace? Wasn't that the name he went by?
Oh.
Something like that. But yeah, and switch positions.
And when we switch positions, it'll clear out all our prior selections.
Yep.
But now we can select different athletes. We can only select different athletes because athletes didn't play multiple positions.
And you can see we went with, like, this is literally a stock vanilla ggplot. We didn't even set the theme or anything. So there's so many options we could do here. How about this though? Let's just try before we go. Everybody now has like a simple way to create their Shiny app. Let's just one of the things I noticed in the sidebar panel, it's kind of wide for the words that we have, like the names. So let's set the width of that and kind of make that a little bit smaller, so that it looks a little more normal, and so that the plots can take up more of the page.
Exactly. So the way you go about doing that is basically a lot of these elements have a width argument. And here you can actually see it's previewing as width equals 4. So this is by default, it's going to be 4 units wide. And these units are really strange. There can be 12 in the width of your web page. So divide. I'm sure there's logic behind it.
I literally just play with them until I get one.
Yeah. So basically divide the panel into 4, or into 12, and then okay, I only want it to be 3 of those, 3/12 of the thing wide. Yeah. And so now we're updating that to be 3. So now when we run this,
and the plot output function, you can do the same thing. You can adjust the width and height of your ggplots within that. Mm-hmm. So now you can see it's smaller.
It still behaves exactly as we would expect.
It still behaves.
We didn't change any other code.
Nothing else. Yep, we can change the plot widths and heights if we wanted. We could also put a cool title on this thing, though. Yep. Let's do title panel. And let's just call it like athlete running demands or something like that. Yeah.
All right, and let's put a comma in there so that it sees it all different. And now what this is going to do, we'll reload the app, relook at it. Ba-dow!
And there it is.
We've got our Shiny app named.
To open it in your browser as well, so there's always that going on too.
Let's see. There we go. So I'm looking at it inside of my Chrome.
And because it's a fluid page, you could drag the browser down, and it's gonna kind of auto change for you. It'll find the best. Right there, it stacks it because that's the best option. The one thing I will say when going from the Shiny app to the browser is that you might have to play with the widths. If you set the widths and heights of your plots or your sidebar panel, they do change a little bit when I go to my browser windows.
Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of, I think that depends on the way that they have your specific browser renders it. Versus RStudio's, like I don't know what exactly browser engine they have baked into it, but I think that's what it's dependent on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But like I mean, we didn't even do anything like labels, like x-axis, y-axis, or anything like that. But all of those are totally options within ggplot. This was just sort of like the main. Here's your first Shiny template.
Babies
and
for
I wish
Shiny.
When I started doing Shiny that I had someone going over that for me, because literally I think I bought like a book, and it was like I just was like none of this makes sense. Yeah, reactive programming, like none of it made sense, and I was like, what is going on here? And so it took a while, but this is literally my like base template just to get data in and see how it looks, and then I start to go from there, which we will do over subsequent episodes.
Which we will. We promise. So just let us know what other Shiny concept you'd like us to be covering, so we can keep an eye towards that going forward over the next several episodes. And we will continue to use this template and build it out and make it more complicated, so you can kind of see the process as you go, so you don't have to jump in and see, oh my gosh, you're doing all this stuff at the very end. I'm totally lost. Hopefully you won't be. Hopefully we'll be able to make it a smooth teaching for this.
Yeah. literally just take some data that you have and change our column headers within the UI and the server and create something.
Yep, exactly. Alrighty, well, I think we'll call it here. As always, drop a comment down below, send us an email, reach out to us. Happy to respond to any questions you have. My name is Ellis Hughes. You can find me on Twitter at Ellis_Hughes.
And I'm Patrick Ward. You can find me on Twitter at OSPPatrick. You can get to both of us on Twitter, comment, send us messages at tidy_explained. You can always get us on email, tidy.explained@gmail.com. We like the feedback, and hopefully if we get some feedback on Shiny apps, we can build something cool. We'll try and hunt down a much more interesting data set than my kind of fake simulation.
And there you go. All right. Keep on exploring your world, guys and gals.